If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
So what kind of shape is the economy in? What kind of an economy is Donald Trump inheriting from Joe Biden in all of its glory? Let's talk to E.J. Antoni, economist, senior fellow at Unleash Prosperity, economist at the Heritage Foundation. E.J., welcome to the show. How do you read this economy? What is Trump inheriting?
Well, Larry, thank you so much for having me. I think what Trump is inheriting, unfortunately, is somewhat of a ticking time bomb. One of the things that people have been truly upset about over the last several years has obviously been inflation, the current cost of living crisis. Unfortunately, what the Federal Reserve has done with cutting interest rates just the last few months and a few of their other moves are going to create more inflationary impulses within the economy. In other words, we're set for even more price increases, regardless of who is president next year. And then on the job front, one of the really interesting things I think that we saw during the election, Larry, was that you repeatedly had polling data where Americans said they were not that thrilled with the job market, despite these blowout job reports month after month that showed the economy constantly adding record numbers of jobs. Well, now we're finding out that a lot of those numbers are being revised down. In fact, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve branch just this past month came out with a new estimate that shows in the second quarter of this year, not only did the economy likely not add any jobs at all, we likely actually lost jobs during that 3-month period. So the labor market is nowhere near as strong and robust as we've been led to believe.
Yeah, and job openings have really slumped, haven't they? Job openings, in the JOLTS release. That I don't know. Is that a leading indicator?
It tends to be. And one of the things I think is really interesting to follow as well is not just JOLTS, but something from the conference board called the Help Wanted Online Index, where they only look specifically at job postings, that are online. And what's interesting is that has actually been somewhat of a better indicator than JOLTS, partially because JOLTS comes from a survey with only about a 30% response rate. So the data is actually pretty volatile, even if there's a good long-term trend. So what we're essentially seeing there is a slump in labor demand. Firms are not able to hire people at the wages that they're demanding today, and a lot of that has to do with what we first were talking about with this current cost of living crisis. People can't afford to live today. They're demanding higher wages, and firms can't afford to pay those wages because they're getting hit with higher costs just like consumers are. The Biden administration's own data shows the wholesale inflation level, as measured by the PPI, is up over 20%, just like consumer inflation levels are.
Interesting. So the Fed Jay Powell, Fed head, is acknowledging that inflation is stickier. It's actually been, it's increased slightly over the last 6 months. They're not hitting their target of 2%. You're running, depending on the measure, core inflation somewhere close to 3%. So why are they cutting interest rates? And does this set up a burst of inflation for Trump in the next year, 2025?
I think it absolutely does, Larry, 100%. And unfortunately, there's not much that President Trump can do to avoid that. He is going to be able to take other steps to bring down prices, right? If you can increase the supply of energy, for example, you'll bring down the price of that input, and that is throughout the economy, so you'll bring down prices everywhere because energy affects the price of everything we do and everything we buy. In terms of why on earth is the Fed making this move, you know, before the election, you could make the argument, well, look, they're trying to get their preferred candidate across the finish line. Obviously, that didn't happen. Now, why are they continuing to do it? Maybe it's just, they're trying to cover themselves to make it look like, well, we weren't just interfering in the election. But if you look at the things that the Fed themselves say they target, or that they look at, I should say, if you look at the unemployment rate, if you look at different labor market statistics, if you look at core inflation levels, they're not trending to where they should be. In other words, the Fed has no business cutting rates. So the only other explanation I can think of, Larry, is the fact that they're trying to rescue a lot of banks who are sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in unrealized losses today. And the reason for those losses was that those banks got on the wrong side of the interest rate trade effectively. They loaded up on very low interest rate assets, whether those were mortgages or government bonds. And then as interest rates rose, they found themselves paying depositors 5%. While the income side of their balance sheet was at 2 or 3%. That's a quick path to insolvency, and that's what did in Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic, and a number of others just within the last year and a half. So I think that might be also one of the mechanics we're seeing at play right now.
You know, one of the things that worries me is the Fed's going to wind up saying Trump policies are inflationary, that tax cuts are inflationary, that tariffs are inflationary. They never uttered a peep with Biden's big spending policies that were inflationary, or the fact that they bought the bonds that were sold to cover the deficits, which created excess money supply. That was inflationary. But they're going to come out with a verdict, DJ, sometime in the next few months that's essentially, well, we have to stay tight, we have to keep rates high because Trump is generating inflation, when in fact it was the Fed that generated the inflation.
Larry, I think you're 100% right, especially if you look back at this Fed's track record. And I don't just mean the fact that they were wrong about everything over the last 4 years, like when they said there would be no inflation, and then they said inflation was transitory. And then at one point they even said, well, inflation's a good thing because it means the economy is growing. Well, look what they said under the first Trump administration when they started getting all of those pro-growth policies through, and you saw growth really get supercharged. What happened? The Fed came out and said, well, we need to continue hiking interest rates because all of this economic growth is somehow going to cause inflation. That's the biggest bunch of Keynesian nonsense we've ever heard, but that's what they did. And by the way, Larry, if I may, I think that's one of the reasons why the Trump economic miracle during his first term was just that, a miracle. The Fed was selling off the balance sheet and hiking interest rates for the first 3 years of the Trump administration. And yet, despite those monetary headwinds, he still managed significant growth.
By the way, this is one reason that I want to see the supply side tax cuts extended and expanded. In the first reconciliation bill, the first fiscal bill, I don't want to wait till a second bill. You know, EJ, if you tax something less, you get more of it. If you have lower marginal tax rates, as you know very well, that's going to create more goods and services out there. That is counter-inflationary. And I think that Mr. Trump's got to go for it. He is, people close to him have said he wants one big, beautiful bill right away. Don't wait till the second half of the year. Get those tax cuts nailed down, including the tax-free cash tips, including the tax-free overtime. Get that stuff nailed down right away. That actually will curb inflation, no matter what the Keynesians at the Fed may say.
I agree with you 100%, Larry, and I am really scared at this notion that the Republicans are somehow banking on multiple reconciliation bills over the next year. I mean, it's like herding cats with this current Congress right now, and they have such slim margins. How on earth are they going to get multiple reconciliation bills done? It's going to be hard enough just to get one across the finish line. And so, Larry, you're absolutely right. We have to prioritize, and we have to get the tax bill done. If you don't, you are going to see a lot of negative economic fallout from that because of what you just articulated. If you tax something more, you get less of it. You tax income more, you tax productivity, you'll get less of those things.
No, I think that's right. I'm crusading for it. I've been crusading for one bill, and I'm going to keep crusading for one bill. Anyway, E.J. Antoni, thank you ever so much for giving us some time on the weekends. Merry Christmas to you, my friend. Folks, we'll take a quick break, and we're going to talk to Andrew Wheeler, former EPA administrator under Mr. Trump, who says Trump can pull the plug on EV mandates. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show.